I come from a family where the women are known for having a great many children. Men seek us out for that reason. Women in my family bask in this. We're valuable, they say. God favors us. That's not quite the way I saw things. A female sheep or goat or cow is valued for the same qualities. Possibly animals don't care, but I do. And it's strange to consider a woman's ability to have children as a sign of God's favor. Oh, I know. People would look at me in stunned incomprehension if they heard me say this. But I've seen bad women who had a great many children. If their husbands were good, you might assume God was rewarding the man, even though their wives didn't deserve it. Yet sometimes neither husband nor wife is good, and they still have many children. Sometimes both husband and wife are good, and they don't have children. So I think there must be more to this matter than any of us can understand. Under normal circumstances, I might not have thought as much about such things as I do. My ability to have children played a huge factor in my life. A man in the community sought me as a wife. Now, Elkanah was a decent fellow. He had been married to Hannah for 10 years, and they had no children. She must have heard a great deal over this, especially since people whispered saying God had done it to her, which ultimately meant they were saying it was her fault. Some people said Hannah was the one who'd urged Elkanah to seek for a second wife so he could have heirs. If so, that seemed a good sign. We could help each other, and maybe she'd be like an older sister. I should have paid more attention to the stories the elders tell about our ancestors. Sarah, the wife of Abraham, had been beautiful but barren, so she'd given her servant Hagar to her husband to bear children. But when Hagar got pregnant, Sarah became terribly jealous. And that's what happened to Hannah and me. She could hardly bear the sight of me once I started having children. Everything I did turned into a thorn in her side. If I sympathized, she said I was taunting her. If I hugged one of my children, she said I was deliberately trying to provoke her. If I sighed with an aching back near the birth of a child, she said I only did it to make her life miserable. The irony is that Elkanah loved her. I was useful to him, and he treated me respectfully. He loved our children, but he never looked at me the way he looked at Hannah. I would have given almost anything to have my husband feel even a little love for me. No, I wouldn't give my children. You can't trade one love for another, but I'd have sacrificed just about anything else. So I could almost understand how Hannah felt. She had Elkanah's love, and he thought that should be enough for her, but it obviously wasn't, and he couldn't understand. So she'd say I was taunting her, and she'd cry, and he'd go to comfort her. I'm not saying I never did anything intentionally. There were unworthy moments. Innocent or not, I paid a huge price because my husband's sympathy was always on Hannah's side. No one ever considered my situation. No one ever asked whether she was assuming something that might not be true. No one asked what it felt like to me that I was being used as if I was no more than a female goat. One day I got incredibly annoyed. We were going up for our annual sacrifice at the shrine, and I was frustrated because nothing I did was right. It was always a miserable trip. Elkanah would give me and the children our share from the sacrifice, and then give Hannah extra. But she was always angry when she saw him giving us our share. Is it what she wanted us to go hungry for the entire trip? In a private moment, I finally said, well, why don't you pray for a child? I meant it sincerely, or almost so, but she threw a look of outrage at me. Now, I'm sure I didn't originate the idea of praying, but whoever did, she prayed. And old Eli, the head of the shrine, he assumed she was drunk. That hardly seemed fair. A bit of Manny would have accused her of being intoxicated, even if not everyone acts very well at the shrine. In the end, Hannah talked Eli around the way she always did with Elkanah. I think Eli even admired her for the way she stuck up for herself. The good news is that Hannah got pregnant and had a son named Samuel. For 5 years she stuck at home with him and didn't even go up to the shrine. Oh, those trips without her were nice. For a few precious days I could pretend to be truly happy. Elkanah didn't look passed me constantly, seeking for Hannah. There were no weeping over our shares of the sacrifice, no martyred glances. To my surprise, Hannah's son was a really nice child. Hannah clung to him, and even Elkanah was a little cut out. I think he almost wanted to stay distant, since Hannah had promised that if she had a son, she would give him back to God. That part seemed a little strange to me. No child who's born is really ours in the first place. They all belong to God. I know, we sometimes act as if the child is ours. So I kept thinking maybe that was Hannah's promise, that she'd remember Samuel belonged to God ultimately and not to her. But then when he was 5, she went back to the shrine again and left him there. Maybe Elkanah knew what she was planning to do, and that's why he tried not to get too close to Samuel. But after that, we only saw Samuel once a year, on the trip to the shrine. Hannah would sew him a new robe and bring it, but otherwise he belonged to the shrine and not to his family. That was Hannah's bargain with God, to give him up when she had him. And then she had more children, so she probably thought that she was being rewarded for what she'd done. Still, this bothered me. I felt as if Samuel had been treated more like a possession that could be bartered to get something. He was a valued possession, to be sure, but still something Hannah acted as if she owned. I knew a lot about being treated as if I was a piece of property. Couldn't forget the loneliness in Samuel's eyes as he would watch his family leave. He had plenty to eat and clothes to wear. He lived with an angry old man whose own sons turned out to be villains. If it had been up to me, I would have taken Samuel home with us. Well, maybe that would have been wrong. Samuel became important in the leadership of our people. He could hear God when almost no one else could. I don't know the right answer. Somehow, wouldn't it have been possible for Samuel to hear God and still experience his family's love? Perhaps he could have even heard God better. Maybe his own sons would have turned out better if he'd known more about having a family. I just don't know. My children haven't grown up to be great leaders, so Hannah and other people might say I'm just trying to make myself feel better. I'm truly grateful for the part Samuel has played for our people. I simply wish it hadn't cost the little boy his family, and maybe his happiness. I help wondering if God cried just a little bit with him when he watched us walk away. I suppose happiness isn't very important to many people. Life sometimes seems all about survival and occasional pleasure. The rich, of course, indulge themselves with pleasures all the time, but I'm not convinced they are truly happy, just sated. There's one consolation. I sometimes think back to the moments that seemed happiest in my life, and they've come when I was with people I loved, and even more when I did something I thought mattered, even like when I did something that made someone else smile. Maybe if we cared more about each other's happiness, there would be fewer problems in the world. I'd like to think that Samuel had some of those moments when he talked with God and when he knew his work made life a little bit better for our people. As for the rest, I'll have to leave it in God's hands. Well, they're better hands than mine anyway. Amen.